What's up, Foxton? Fox here, welcome to a quick vid about the Dell XPS 13 Plus featuring my nail clippers. So I've used this for a few days now, and I am divisive about it, which sucks because that's the number one thing that I'm hoping not to happen when I spend so much money on such a compact machine. And here's why I'm indecisive. Because what it does absolutely fantastic. This thing is an absolute 13 and 15 inch killer. The i7 1280p in this machine is absolutely awesome, and it shreds pretty much anything you throw at it. 4K 60 FPS video editing, not an issue. You'll still be able to play back smoothly without anything. Photoshop, what is this? Kittyland? Oh, the screen. There are no words to describe how awesome this screen is. You have to see it to believe it. I mean, this thing is just absolutely amazing. There is no camera, especially my crappy webcam that I'm using today, that can show off how good the screen is. You have to see it for yourself. If you haven't ever seen an OLED panel, it will change your life. My dad, who is an avid Mac fan, can admit that this screen is better than the one on his 2021 MacBook Pro because there is barely any bloom whatsoever. Everything is incredibly sharp, and OLED does what a mini LED really can't. It's even a touchscreen, which is awesome. It's built really well, and it's 2.7 pounds. This thing is incredibly light and fun to carry around. And that's what it's been advertised as. That's what all the reviewers say. This thing, if you want, in my opinion, the best 13-inch Windows laptop ever, in my opinion, one of the best Windows 11 laptops made, period, this is going to be it. But what it does wrong, it does wrong. 4K OLED is hard to push on a 55 watt hour battery. I understand that. And this is where my issue lies. It's something that I'm indecisive about. It isn't an immediate don't recommend because of battery life, because if you're doing Google Docs, which is what I would do most of my time on battery, then you'll get like 6 hours and 30 minutes, which for a 13-inch should not be acceptable, but it's usable, which is why I'm still considering, for the most part, using this laptop as my daily driver. But if you do anything sort of demanding, it's gonna do a lot worse. Let me pull up my handy dandy spreadsheet here. So I had the brightness cranked up when I did the first test, and all of these are estimations and extrapolations. I watched 20 minutes of 4K and 1080p video and extrapolated from there, and the estimation would be that you get about 4.5 hours of video watching at 70% brightness on this. So the brightness was pretty high, which means that if you were to turn it down to about 50, which is in my opinion, the minimum comfort level for this, if you go any lower, it's just too dim, then you'll probably get a little bit more. Google Docs with brightness at 50% would last about 6 hours and 40 minutes. Games absolutely shred the battery on this thing. You'd be able to play an hour and 15 minutes of CSGO at 1080p with the lowest settings. With that said, it ran really well for what it was. It was always above 60 FPS, and considering we were not on charge, that's pretty impressive. And we were on power saver mode. A 4K 60 FPS video export, although it went pretty fast, did take 15% of my battery for an 8-minute long render. If you do Cinebench on this thing without keeping it plugged in, and you turn all bets off, no power saver mode or anything like that, you will get a very nice score of 8,709. So you will be able to render on this without any issues whatsoever when it's not plugged in, but it will last you less than an hour if you're maxing out the CPU on this thing. If you put power saver on and run Cinebench, it gets you around 7,700 points, which is still really good. And if you plug it into a wall with ultra performance, you get 10,791 points. It's typically what people say. You'll get around 10,700. My personal one was 10,351, so I must have had something running in the background, but you'll get around 10,700, and that's a really solid result for such a tiny laptop that really never gets loud. So I think I'm gonna keep it just because the battery life isn't awful for like Google Docs and watching YouTube videos. 2 USB-C ports kind of sucks. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But what's nice about USB-C charging is I can get an Anker battery extender, like a laptop charger power bank, plug it in, and it'll work perfectly fine. It won't go very fast, and it might not charge all the way depending on which power bank you get, but it'll work great. And because it's only 55 watt hours, you really don't need a huge power bank in order to charge this thing up. She gets hot when under load, but there are different options by Dell for like a cool option and things like that. So you'll be able to run this thing however you want. It's not so hot that it's like a detriment. It's just hotter than, let's say, a MacBook. As you can see, there's no visible touchpad, but I've never had any issues with that. You always know where a trackpad is going to be. I've never accidentally scrolled off of it or anything like that. It's perfectly fine. Keyboard, the actual keys themselves, perfectly serviceable. You're gonna have no issues. I type at normal speed on this thing, even though it looks a little bit wonky. The touch bar is fine for the most part. It took me a little bit to get used to. I would accidentally hit the mute button if I was playing video games. Going to function and then pressing function buttons can be a little bit finicky, and double presses are kind of common on these, but they had to do it for cooling reasons in order to get this to be such a fantastic machine. Face ID is fast and the camera's pretty good, as you can see here. Now, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but keep in mind, my professional 4K camera struggles when it comes to this sort of lighting that I have right now, and for what it is, I really can't complain. It's smooth. There's no visible pixels. The only thing that you're kind of noticing is grain because of how dimly lit this place is. Otherwise, I give this camera a fantastic, I don't know, like 7 out of 10 in terms of like even just standardized webcams, honestly. And overall, I really like this. The only problem that I have, two Thunderbolt, whatever. I bought it because this is also like a product piece. It's just the battery. If it was only just a little bit better, where I know I could comfortably watch YouTube videos for 6 hours, do Google Docs for 8, then I wouldn't even be here. It's not a fantastic battery if you get 6 hours watching YouTube videos on an Ultrabook, but that would be enough for me to just not even care. But because it's only 6.5 hours of Google Docs and 4.5 hours of watching YouTube, that's the only piece of skepticism I have. Otherwise, I would safely say that this is like the best Windows laptop ever, and it competes with a MacBook. Gaming performance, it's weird, and I want to try and fix it because I think it might be IrisX's drivers. If not, then I'm gonna have to contact Dell support because I have bad graphics in here. Because sometimes it'll run at 60 FPS on Skyrim without any sort of issues at 4K. Other times it'll run at 20 FPS. Or for instance, I was playing Team Fortress 2 and getting 230 FPS. Then all of a sudden, I would drop down to 2 FPS and the game would freeze. And I do not understand why, because these graphics really aren't that bad. That stuttering issue is just too much for me to bear. And yet for some reason, CSGO ran perfectly fine when I was playing it without plugging it in. So I don't know what the problem is. When you get a Windows machine, you're always gonna have those sort of quirks. And that was my quick vid of the Dell XPS 13 Plus. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, like, subscribe, do what you usually do, and as always, buy yourself something nice.